Hello and welcome. It's fantastic to see we've already got over 100 people online. We're a couple of minutes before we get started. Can you just let me know in the chat if you can hear me and see me okay? Wow, we've got people from all over the world, from Cyprus, Costa Rica, Belgium, Kenya, India, Dresden, UK, Paris. Hopefully a lot of our friends in Asia are still asleep at this time and will be able to catch the replay. Alrighty. So I'm getting a couple of yeses coming through. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So welcome everybody. It's amazing to connect. I always love to be able to jump online and do these masterclasses. For those of you who are new and this is your first time, can you just pop first time in the chat so that we can get a sense of how many people are new to our masterclass series. We aim to have a masterclass every month. Now next month will be an exception to that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that towards the end of our session. Next month we've got something special in store for you. Can see and hear okay. All right. Fantastic. So each month we aim to do a free masterclass that shares current thinking around concept-based inquiry. This month I'm doing an introductory masterclass for people who are new to concept-based inquiry, or I know that every time we do these introductory masterclasses, we also have people who are fairly experienced, who have done our courses or who are part of our collaborative membership program, who like to just jump in, or sometimes our certified trainers who like to just jump in and hear the different ways and the different ways things are explained and the different examples. So welcome everybody. For those of you who haven't met me before, I am a full-time educational consultant specializing in concept-based inquiry, and a little about me on a personal level. So lots of people often think that I'm based in the United States until they hear my accent. I'm actually based in a very small town called Greytown in New Zealand. We only have one main street and one primary school in the town. So that's where I call home right now, and that is where our main PLI office is. We have a team of 5 based here in a little office. Paul Starkey is online in the chat today. Thank you, Paul, for being up so early in the morning. It's only 6:30 a.m. here right now. If you've got any questions, then just drop them into the chat. If you're having any technical difficulties, then Paul will be able to support you. So although I'm here in New Zealand and we have our team here in New Zealand, there are a few other places in the world that also hold a special place in my heart and that I have called home at different points in my life. So I was actually born in Sydney, Australia, to two New Zealand parents who went over there on holiday for 9 months and ended up staying for 9 years and coming home with a couple of extra kids, which is interesting. My brother and I were both born in Australia. But this similar story happened with myself and our family. So I then came back to New Zealand, spent most of my upper primary or elementary and secondary school here in New Zealand. And then when I had graduated and been to Teachers College and taught for a few years in New Zealand, I decided it was time to head overseas and got my first international teaching job at a school in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, the most southern state. So I worked there for a couple of years and actually went on to become a PYP coordinator there, and then moved to Cairo, Egypt as a PYP coordinator. After a brief stint back home in New Zealand, it was one of those times when I thought that I was done with international travel, came home for a year and went, oh, not quite finished. So headed back over to Cairo, had an amazing time in Cairo, right at the time of the Egyptian Revolution, which was a really interesting time, or the Arab Spring. It was an interesting time in history to be there. That's where I met my husband, David, who is Australian, and we moved on to Frankfurt, Germany, and worked at the international school there for about 5 years and had 2 more children. So just like my parents, I had 2 children overseas and then returned home to New Zealand finally to be closer to family. And now that we're home, we've had 1 more child. So I'm also a mum of 3 small children, the youngest being 2 and the oldest is 9. So that's a little bit about me personally and about my teaching career. I now work full-time as an educational consultant, as I said before, and I became a certified Erickson and Lanning CBCI trainer and presenter. That was something I did back in 2012, and I now lead the Trainer Certification Institute. If that is something that you are interested in pursuing, maybe Paul, I know that we talked about which links we would need, and we didn't talk about the Institute because it's on waitlist now. But Paul, if you could grab the waitlist for the Institute, we have filled the places for our August start next year. However, if we get any movement with that, then we will reach out first to people on our waitlist. So if you're interested in becoming a certified trainer, make sure that you get your application in on the waitlist. I went on to co-author concept-based curriculum and instruction for the Thinking Classroom with Dr. Lynn Erickson and Dr. Lois Lanning. That was the 2nd edition, and it's the edition that brings together the structure of knowledge and structure of process. After that, I co-authored Concept-Based Inquiry in Action with my good friend and colleague, Carla Marshall. And that came about because we met at the Erickson and Lanning Trainer Certification Institute and really connected there. And each year after that, we would meet up at conferences. And when we met at conferences, we'd always be checking in with what the other was doing at the time, what they were working on. And one year, Carla said to me, I'm going to start working on a book about concept-based inquiry. And I said, oh, that sounds amazing. I'm just starting a video series because I think that teachers need to be able to see what concept-based inquiry looks like in action. And so we decided to collaborate on the project. And we thought that we would start with a video series. And as part of that video series, we would be able to just share snippets of concept-based classrooms. But we pretty quickly realized that the videos wouldn't stand alone and they would need further explanation for teachers to really be able to utilize the strategies that they were seeing. So the videos that we were filming became part of the book, Concept-Based Inquiry in Action, which is the green book that you can see there on the slide. And the framework for that book was really around a model of inquiry that Carla and I developed in order to be able to support our own thinking and to support the educators that we were working with in articulating how concept-based inquiry is different from other models of inquiry. So that's what I'm going to delve into today, to explore what is concept-based inquiry and each of the phases in the model of inquiry that Carla and I developed together. So our 3 questions for today are: what is concept-based inquiry? What is inductive teaching? And how can we use a model of inquiry to inform teaching and learning? I'll also be sharing a few different strategies that you can utilize in your classroom, either next week or maybe even, if you're lucky enough to already be on school holidays, next year. Let me know if you're already on school holidays in the chat. If you are someplace different, enjoying hopefully some sunshine because it might be summer holidays, but those of you who are in Europe and returned home to New Zealand, maybe you're, or Australia, maybe it's not so warm. All right. So what is concept-based inquiry? Concept-based inquiry is really bringing together 2 pedagogical ideas about how students learn. The first is inquiry-based learning, and Carla and I define inquiry-based learning as a focus on the use of active questioning to drive learning, and concept-based learning as a focus on transferable understanding to organize learning. So we're supporting students in using an inquiry approach that has a focus on active questioning. Now, it's really important to acknowledge that that active questioning is on both the part of the teacher and the student. So teachers guiding questions through this process of concept-based inquiry are essential in being able to support students in reaching conceptual understandings. This is not discovery learning where we're leaving students to themselves to see what ideas they come up with for themselves or what big ideas they can come up with. So the model of inquiry that Carla and I developed was based on actively working towards supporting students in generalizing their learning so that they could reach transferable understandings, and then actively transferring that thinking to be able to test their thinking, to be able to explore new contexts, and to be able to take action on their learning. One of the phases of inquiry that we included that we hadn't seen in any other model was the focus phase, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but that focus phase is really important in a concept-based inquiry model to be able to support students in understanding what single concepts mean before they're asked to explore the relationship between concepts. So a little note about planning with students. When we're asking students to design their own unit or to be able to be involved in something like the PYP exhibition or the personal project, we don't want students to write their conceptual understandings, in this case, at the beginning of the unit, if they're involved in that research process or it's more of a personal inquiry. Let me know in the chat box, why might that be? Why don't we want students to start by writing a big idea or a central idea or a statement of inquiry? What do you think? Just pop that in the chat. There's a slight delay on the chat, so I'll have to give it a moment to come through for you. And then give you a moment to put your ideas into the chat. Why would we not want to start with writing conceptual understandings right at the beginning of the unit? We've got people on summer break in Pakistan, in Egypt, in Texas, and it's blazing hot. I love it. So hot. I've got the heater on here keeping me warm this morning. Jamie's saying it's limiting to write the conceptual understanding at the beginning of the unit. What else, everyone? Let me know in the chat what you think. The unit should build to conceptual understandings. They may need teacher guidance to begin with. We want them to be thinking. We want students to be able to discover the understanding on their own in the unit, to avoid direct learning to a specific skill they discover on their own. It reduces the scope of the inquiry. It's more focused. They widen their horizons. So lots of good ideas there coming through. Some people are saying they write their own central idea after brainstorming or a provocation. In actual fact, it will be later than that even in the unit. So let's just to kind of think about it further, explore this idea here. In a concept-based inquiry classroom, we want students, we can either use an inductive approach or a deductive approach in the classroom. So in an inductive approach, and this is the approach that is often used in the classroom, we would explore factual examples, look for patterns, and then form generalizations. But in a deductive approach, the teacher provides the generalization to examine, explores factual examples, and then validates that generalization. So in actual fact, the deductive approach is what we see in many schools, and it's certainly the approach that I was encouraged to use, and I encouraged others to use when I was working as a PYP coordinator and first building an understanding of concept-based inquiry. Let me know in the chat if you've heard from your PYP coordinator, or even if you are a PYP coordinator and you've really advocated for it's important to share the central idea, or it's important, if you're an MYP coordinator, to put the statement of inquiry in your slides and share that with students at the beginning of each unit or each lesson. Let me know if that's common practice in your school. That's using the deductive approach. I'm seeing some yes in the chat. Yes, yes. It's pretty common. So we advocate in a concept-based inquiry approach for exploring the factual examples, looking for patterns, and students then forming generalizations themselves, because that's their understanding. If we want to talk about student agency, in terms of supporting student agency, we want students to be able to build understanding for themselves. Rather than the teacher saying, this is what I want you to understand, let's prove it, we can use our guiding questions in a way that supports students in looking for patterns, making connections, and articulating the understanding in their own words. So that's what we're advocating for in a model of concept-based inquiry. I'm still seeing more. Yes, we unpack the central idea. Yes, we share central idea at the beginning of the unit. It's a common approach to have it posted in our classrooms. So what I'm advocating for today is to change that practice, is to move away from posting the central idea or sharing the central idea in the classroom. And in actual fact, that was exactly where I was myself. So if you're at that point in your journey, it's pretty common. It's what a lot of IB schools are doing, or what a lot of schools who want to use big ideas are using in their classroom, where we unpack the conceptual understanding or central idea, statement of inquiry, and tell students the understanding. But where we want to move to is an approach where students are guided to see patterns, make connections, and share understanding for themselves. So this is what we'll be unpacking and exploring together today. So in the concept-based inquiry model, we do start with engaging students. We want to engage students emotionally and intellectually with the unit. We want to activate and assess their prior knowledge to see where they're at, what they already know about the unit, what experiences they've already had, and invite them to start sharing that. And we want to provoke student inquiry and invite questions. We can do this through a range of strategies. We might do it through an opinion-based strategy, like a four-corner debate, where we use debate statements to elicit student thinking on a topic, to encourage them to explore some debatable questions. We can also do it through discussion. So there's a range of discussion strategies that we can utilize to get students to share theirs. One of my favorite is actually a silent discussion, where we get all of the students to write down their ideas on a thought, on a thinking prompt or a question, and then after 3 or 4 minutes of writing, maybe longer depending on the age of the students and the discussion prompt, they swap papers with each other and then explore opportunities to question, to comment, to give feedback on that thinking for 2 or 3 minutes, and then swap papers again. And then eventually the paper will go back to the original author, who gets feedback on their ideas and their thinking, who has questions answered, and they have a final chance to respond to that. One of the beautiful things about the silent discussion is that it gives all students an opportunity to engage. And we know that in a classroom discussion, sometimes some students, or in some cases even the teacher, can dominate the conversation. So the silent discussion is a way of ensuring that all students have a voice and all students are engaged in that process. And the other way that we would engage students is in experiential strategies. So that might be going on a field trip, and field trips are really important in a concept-based or an inquiry-based approach, and we can utilize them at different times in the inquiry. And it's really important to be thinking about at what point in the inquiry we want to take on that field trip, because a field trip should be very different if it's a part of the engage phase versus a little later in the unit where the purpose is to do some investigation. The questions that we're asking, the outcomes of the field trip would be different. And so we need to be careful not to just plan a field trip too late in the process so that we can only go towards the end of the unit, if in actual fact it was intended as a way to engage students and get them excited about the inquiry. Too often those field trips happen based on when we can book the buses. We need to be a little bit more organized than that. Another beautiful engaged strategy is a simulation, where we get students involved, perhaps in some kind of role play, or immerse them in an imaginary scenario where they take an active role in that. So that's the engage phase, to support students and get them activating that prior knowledge and sort of eliciting thinking to also build some shared experiences around the topic and give them an introduction to some of the case studies that we might explore further in the unit. Then the focus phase, as I mentioned earlier, is one of our phases of inquiry that we hadn't seen in any other model of inquiry, but felt that it was really important to support students with being able to understand an individual concept before we expect students to explore the relationship between concepts. And we want to make sure that we've got a common understanding of those concepts, because all too often we might think that students understand a concept, and we might find out towards the end of the unit that if we are asking them to form a generalization about migration or exploration or genetic inheritance, that right at the end of the unit they'll go, what does that mean? And so pausing to make sure that we've built a common understanding helps to explore factual examples and case studies that connect to the unit concepts. It also gives us an opportunity to assess students' understanding of individual concepts. We can do this through sorting activities where we're exploring examples and non-examples. We can also do it through naming strategies where we're working to build a common definition. Now, concept formation, or concept attainment as it's sometimes called, is a little different from building conceptual understandings, because as we talked about before, in a concept-based inquiry classroom, we want to use an inductive approach where we're not telling students the understanding at the beginning of the unit, we're supporting them in building understanding themselves. But when it comes to the focus phase into concept formation, we can use an inductive or a deductive approach to build that shared understanding. By that I mean we can explore examples and non-examples and build to a definition, which would be the inductive approach. Or with concept formation, we can use a deductive approach where we give students a definition and then they explore examples and non-examples to consolidate their understanding of that concept. This would be really important if we're introducing a brand new concept and students don't already have any understanding of it. If we're expecting them to respond to a sort of examples and non-examples of a concept, but they don't even know what the concept means, we're not setting our students up for success. So sometimes with concept formation, we share a definition and then we'll explore examples and non-examples. Other times we do want to give students a definition first. We can do that by providing the definition for them or giving them an opportunity to research and find a definition, but we start with the definition to support their understanding of concept formation. So I want to give you a little example of what this is like by using a quick example of a is-not strategy where we're exploring examples and non-examples. So I want you to imagine that we're starting a unit where one of the important concepts in the unit is around prejudice. And so we're going to explore some examples and non-examples here, and I want you to just let me know in the chat as I share each one. Do you think this is an example of prejudice, or is this a non-example of prejudice? So you can just type in the chat is or is not in the chat. Our first statement is Rosa Parks had to give up her seat on the bus because she was black. So let me know in the chat, is this an example of prejudice or a non-example, right? Is or is not in that chat for me. Just give that a minute to come through in the chat. Someone's asked if the recording will be available. Yes, it will be available afterwards as a replay. So pretty much everyone on this one has said, yes, this is an example of prejudice. Let's take a look at the next one. Pedro is Brazilian. He thinks Brazil is the best country in the world. Is this prejudice or is it not prejudice? Maybe in this one, if you can just write a little 2 in front of it so I can check that that you're responding to statement 2. So write to and then is or is not. So this one's interesting. We're getting some is and some is not here. Some people think Pedro is prejudice, and some people think that this is not prejudice. Let's look at another example, and this one write 3 in front of it. So 3, Anthony didn't get the job because the company wanted to hire a woman. Let me know, 3 is or is not? Just waiting for the your response to number 3 to come through in the chat. I'm still seeing your responses to 2 at this stage and just reading the responses that we're getting to 2. Interesting. We're getting mostly with 3. We're getting that this is. Yeah, it's coming through now. There's such a delay. Debatable, depending on the job. Interesting. Marissa, tell us more about that. Why would it be debatable depending on the job? And Veronica, why is that context of the job so important to whether or not this is bias? Oh, prejudice, rather. So with 3, we're still seeing some is not, some is. Barbie is saying, I can see students wanting to discuss several of these. We absolutely would discuss them. It's a little bit tricky to do it in an online webinar format, but the discussion would be a really important part of it. You're absolutely right, Barbie. All right. Some schools may require a female PE teacher. So is that requirement by the school prejudice or not, and why? Interesting. It could be that there are only men working there and they would like more women to join. That is true, Danielle, but would that be prejudice to Anthony or not if that was the case? If you're working in preschools with little babies, you might prefer a woman. That's true, Marissa, but does that make it not prejudice if you prefer a woman because you're working with little babies? All right, some interesting ideas, and this is the kind of debate that we want to be having as we're exploring whether these concepts are prejudice or not prejudice. Under what circumstances might it be not prejudice? Here's another one for you. When Amira started a new school, she was laughed at because she had an accent. Are her peers who are laughing at Amira being prejudice or not prejudice? So write number 4 in front of this one, 4, and then let me know in the chat. Is this prejudice or not prejudice? Four is. It's so prejudice. Some are saying it's not prejudice. It is. It's not. Okay. So what we're seeing here is mostly number 4, people are saying that this is prejudice. A few are saying it is not prejudice. And this is where we would want to have a little bit more debate and unpack what it means to be prejudice. So by exploring these examples and non-examples, it allows us here to be able to really test our understanding of what is prejudice. What does it mean to be prejudice, rather than just providing a definition. One more, and then we'll move on to the next phase of inquiry. So is or is not. Sarah started at an English-speaking school in France. At lunchtime, all the other kids spoke French. She felt left out. Is this prejudice or is it not prejudice? You can write number 5 in front of this one for Sarah. Is it prejudice or is it not prejudice? Okay, most people with 5 are saying that this is not prejudice. But we are getting some is. Yep. So Anne-Marie's saying 5 is not principled. So the interesting thing that starts to happen when we're building an understanding of a concept is that we explore that concept by looking at other examples and non-examples, but we also start to use other concepts to define what it is and is not. So we're seeing principled and opinion and bias coming through as other concepts that help us to build an understanding of what prejudice may or may not mean. Now, at this point in the process, what we might want to do is now move into having debated these examples and non-examples of the concept of prejudice. We might then move into building a shared class definition of prejudice. So we could do that using a strategy like create and combine, where we each write our own definition, combine it with a partner to create a shared definition, taking that shared definition and combining it with another group. Barbie's saying this would be a great way to tie into learner profile attributes as well. Absolutely. So by building from the examples and non-examples, when we start to think about a definition, we're in a much stronger place to think about certain concepts maybe that we want to include in that, and criteria which would be prejudice or not prejudice in this example. This is a really powerful strategy that can be used in different units and with different concepts, and right through from young students to the end of high school, and adults can use this strategy to build a shared understanding of a concept. In actual fact, it's a strategy that I love to use in staff meetings as well, to build a shared understanding of concepts like differentiation or inquiry or concept-based learning or curriculum, so that we can build that shared understanding with our students. All right, so that is the focus phase. That focus phase is designed to help students understand a single concept before they explore the relationship between concepts, and to build a shared understanding here. So the next phase, after we've engaged our students, we've made sure that they understand the driving concepts of the unit, is the investigate phase. And the investigate phase is where we're doing the research. Students are exploring factual examples or case studies and expanding on their understanding of the unit's concepts by really diving into those worked examples or those case studies. The focus here is to answer teachers' guiding questions and student questions. So the teachers' guiding questions are what's helping keep us on track to those curriculum outcomes or the conceptual understandings that we're working towards. We'll be exploring a lot of the answers to a lot of our factual questions in the investigate phase. We're also working to acquire disciplinary and interdisciplinary skills, and we can build conceptual understandings about those skills that we want, the research skills, the communication skills, the thinking skills. For those of you in International Baccalaureate skills, the approaches to learning is a great place to look to build out conceptual understandings. So in a concept-based inquiry unit, as we're working through this investigate phase, we're actually building to not just one central idea or statement of inquiry, but 5 to 9 understandings within that unit. Because if students are researching or investigating for 5, 6, 7 weeks, then they should be able to come to an understanding of just more than one idea or more than one understanding in 6 to 8 weeks. If we think about it really, 6 to 8 weeks, Just one understanding really isn't rigorous enough. We need to be able to articulate all of the understandings that we're building towards in that time. Now, when it comes to investigation, this is where some inquiries fall apart, or where sometimes we don't set students up for success. Because if our investigate phase just looks like go to the library and go online and ask Google the answers to your questions, we're not setting students up for success, and we're also not creating those engaging learning opportunities. So in the investigate phase, there's lots of different ways that we can support students in researching those factual questions. We might explore that through conducting scientific experiments. And I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What are your favorite ways to support students in investigating? We might go on another field trip here. So you can see there's a picture of students in a museum. We might use virtual reality technology, but do beware that the recommendations with virtual reality are that students shouldn't be using virtual reality under 12. So just keep that in mind if you're working in elementary school, because that augmented reality is not good for the developing brain. But that is a strategy that we can use for our middle and high school students. They might also be exploring their or investigating in a PE lesson by actually conducting an experiment. What happens if I, stand with my feet together and throw a ball? What happens to the distance that I can throw if I stand with my feet further apart? So that investigation or that experimentation doesn't just happen in science. We can certainly investigate in more of our skills-based disciplines like PE and music and drama. What happens if I do it like this? What would change if I did it like this as part of that investigation? Jodie's saying, I love providing case studies for investigating. Are investigations like lines of inquiry? Great question, Danielle. So no, it's a little bit different. The lines of inquiry tell us the case studies that we would be exploring or what we're inquiring into. So the investigation, I'm thinking, so yes, the lines of inquiry would be what we're exploring in the investigate phase, but I'm talking here about also how we would investigate. The lines of inquiry point us to the case studies that we'd be exploring. I meant understandings, not investigations. Are the understandings like the lines of inquiry? No. So the lines of inquiry, the way that I use lines of inquiry in a curriculum that requires that you articulate the lines of inquiry, is the lines of inquiry suggest what will we inquire into. They give us the scope or the parameters of this investigate phase. So we might inquire into the human body systems, or we might inquire into the Amazon rainforest as a case study of an ecosystem, or we might inquire into an ecosystem of students' choice. So my lines of inquiry basically tell us what will we be investigating. The understandings are what we want them to come to, the conceptual understanding we want them to come to as a result of that investigation. We can share the lines of inquiry with students. This is what we'll be inquiring into in this unit. We don't want to share the conceptual understandings with our students. We want them to come to the understandings themselves. So we articulate them in our unit planning because it helps us to design the unit. It helps us to articulate our guiding questions for the unit, but we don't share the conceptual understandings where we would potentially share the lines of inquiry with students. All right, so keep those questions coming in the chat. Paul's going to gather them up for me and I will be answering questions at the end. Alrighty, so that's the investigate phase, making sure that we're giving students enough support through our guiding questions, through curating resources, that we're not just leaving them to their own devices to go out and find the answers on Google. Then the organize phase is designed to help students to think at both the factual and conceptual level, to represent concepts and ideas using different materials and media in different subject areas, to recognize and analyze skills in context. And it's really helping them to start to see patterns and to make connections. We can do that through making models. Here you can see some examples of making mathematical models to represent place value, or through sorting and grouping. So you can see here my dear friend Gail, Miss Gail's classroom, where the kindergarten students are conducting a scientific experiment in the investigate phase, and then they're using sorting hoops to record and organize their thinking around, I think this was about materials and flexibility. So flexible and inflexible materials in the sorting hoops here. We can also organize our thinking. Oops, I haven't changed the top line there. We can also organize our thinking by making anecdotal notes on documents. So the anecdotal notes and the highlighting is designed to focus on specific guiding questions for those notes. And we can support students using charts and graphic organizers. So this is Shay Hubbard Farmer's graphic organizer, where she's used case studies down the side, and in this case the lesson was around characters and the lessons or morals in those stories. And so each of the lines of the cross comparison chart she's using here is a different case study or text, and then along the top is the question. So what was the problem, what was the result in the story, what was the lesson or moral, and what is your opinion as a reader? So the organized phase is one that's often skipped over in a inquiry classroom, where we're expecting students to go straight from their investigation into the generalized. And if we're not using organized strategies to explicitly help students see patterns and making connections, that's when they may struggle to form those generalizations. Sometimes if students haven't generalized, we'll go back, we'll kind of reverse engineer it and say, well, how did we help them? How did we help them to make those patterns explicit? Now, at this point in a lot of inquiry cycles, the outcome would be to present and summarize or share their thinking with others. But in a concept-based inquiry classroom, we will sometimes present and summarize our research or our investigation, but the purpose of that is to share with others so we can explore patterns further. And the lovely thing about this is it gives students a purpose for presenting their information. We're not just presenting and listening to others' presentations for the sake of it. We're actually doing it to answer some bigger conceptual questions here. And so, I remember when I went to school, when we had to share out, a kid gets really involved and excited about sharing their own thing. And then by the time they've heard 4 other presentations, they're switching off. They're not necessarily engaged in each person's presentation. They're just thinking about what it is that they want to do. But here, when we're presenting and summarizing our finding, we're doing it with a purpose, and that purpose is to start to make connections, locate patterns across factual examples, and then articulate that in terms of a conceptual understanding or a generalization. So for those of you who are used to the IB classroom, the International Baccalaureate classroom, the PYP central idea and the MYP statement of inquiry is one form of conceptual understanding, and we would build to those conceptual understandings or generalizations here at this point in the unit. Rather than using them right at the beginning in the engage phase, unpacking the central idea, here is where we use a conceptual question or a sentence frame to invite students to generalize. So it's using, again, that inductive approach where we use the factual examples in the investigate phase, we look for patterns in the organize phase, and then we form those generalizations. So here's a couple of examples of generalizations. We understand that organisms inherit many traits from their parents, or we understand that conflict may arise from power struggles, ideological clashes, or the desire to control resources. So in order to support students in generalizing, there's lots of different strategies that we could use, and in our book, Concept-Based Inquiry in Action, we unpack some of those strategies. But here are the most common 3 that I would use. So the first might be a sentence frame. If I want students to come to that understanding at the top, that we understand conflict may arise from power struggles, ideological clashes, or the desire to control resources, having investigated lots of different examples of conflict and what caused those conflicts. So my factual question might be, what was the conflict? Who was involved? What caused the conflict? Now my sentence frame might be, we understand that conflict may arise from ... And our students will then look across those patterns. They'll sit together with students who've explored different case studies or different conflicts to start to say, well, what big ideas can we see here about what causes conflict? And the sentence frame, we understand conflict may arise from, is an invitation to summarize that and to come to a conceptual understanding. Or instead of that sentence frame, we might say, so as we come together and share ideas, I want you to be answering the question, what causes conflict? And so then students are invited to form their generalization around what causes conflict, and they might just start with, we understand that, and they'll write their generalization. Or we might use a concept bank. So we might say to students, wow, we've explored lots of different ideas. I'm going to pull some of the concepts out of your graphic organizers. And we might have on the board a concept bank like conflict, power struggle, ideological clashes, control of resources, territory, religion, beliefs, and we'll have a long list of concepts here. I want you to use the concepts in the concept bank to explain the big idea that you're coming to as a result of this unit. Now, we would probably use a concept bank alone only if students were very familiar with forming generalizations. If it was the first time or they were relatively new to writing generalizations, we can also pair these strategies. So we might use the concept bank with the conceptual question, what causes conflict? All right, so we're seeing in the chat, we need to ensure more of this at my school. As an EAL teacher, these sentence frames are important. Using cross comparisons charts is a nice strategy to use. Absolutely. We use cross comparison charts all the time in a concept-based inquiry classroom just to help students organize their thinking, look across their case studies that they've explored to see those patterns and make connections. After students have generalized, we don't end there. We also want to create opportunities for them to transfer their learning. And transferring learning can look different depending on the purpose. So we can transfer learning to test and justify the validity of generalizations. So sometimes sometimes the generalizations that our students come up with are overgeneralized, or they're not quite accurate, or in some cases they're just wrong. So then we want to explore some case studies that would contradict their thinking. Or in other cases, we want to test and justify a generalization to prove that it is true. So we're just looking at some more case studies to validate that thinking. So that test and justify is an important part of consolidating thinking or refining thinking if a generalization is inaccurate. Now, it's really important as a teacher to be aware that you don't have to do all of that in the single lesson. Sometimes it very naturally flows from the conversation where they've generalized into some form of transfer where we can validate their thinking, or we can come up with a case study because somebody else in the class has explored a case study that might help the students to stress test it and maybe prove that it's not always true. Other times we need to go away and do a little bit more research or find a new case study, a book, a video, an article, and we'll share it with students the next day or the next week and stress test that generalization so that they can refine and rewrite their generalization. We also transfer learning to apply generalizations to new events and situations. This can happen at the time of writing the generalization, or it can happen much later. So it might be that later in the year there's a current event that happens around the world, or a global event that happens that relates to something that we studied earlier, and we'd go back and revisit that generalization to help us understand what's happening in the world at that time. This may also happen when we're applying the generalization later in the year. So maybe we've come up with a generalization in our writing or in our mathematics, in our literacy or our mathematics, and later in the year, as we're building on a new unit, we want to revisit that earlier generalization and transfer it into the work that we're doing. Generalizing would also be to use those experiences or understandings to form predictions or hypotheses. So making predictions about factual examples, about real world situations based on their generalizations. And then finally, to take meaningful action on one's learning. So we transfer our understanding into a real world context by applying that learning or taking action. And we wanted to create rich opportunities for that. We also want to make sure that as teachers, we haven't planned that all out in advance, that we're giving students an opportunity to come up with their own action as a result of what they have come to understand. And then reflection is something that we had originally had as a final phase of inquiry, but in actual fact, we want reflection to be embedded right throughout the inquiry process. So that's why you actually see it. It's hard to see in the tiny picture in the bottom corner, but reflection comes right around the outside. It's embedded into every phase of inquiry. We're reflecting as we're planning and monitoring and evaluating learning. So the purpose of reflection is to build a sense of personal agency, to enable students to plan and monitor their own learning process, and to individually and collectively evaluate learning progress during and at the end of the inquiry. So again, in our book, we've got lots of strategies that are designed to help students actually pause and reflect on their learning. Actually building conceptual understandings that support reflection is also a powerful way of building up that metacognitive skill. And goal setting is another big part of reflection. So I won't go into a lot of detail on that today, but it is a powerful way to support reflection. All right, so that's it in terms of the session that I've prepared for you today. If you're interested in learning more, the book that Carla and I wrote, Concept-Based Inquiry in Action, is available directly from our publisher, Corwin Press, or you can buy it on Amazon. Paul can pop the link into the chat for the book. And we also run an 8-week online course, Concept-Based Inquiry in Action. And so if you're interested in finding out more about that, we'll also put that link into the chat. The Concept-Based Inquiry in Action course is taught through self-paced videos, group Zoom calls, and a one-on-one coaching call with one of our coaches to get feedback on the unit planner that you design through that process, or through that 8 weeks of learning together. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, you can also send us an email. Paul's just popping the link there into the chat for you as well. Alrighty, so I'm going to go now to just a full screen slide. And if you've got any questions about concept-based inquiry, then you can pop them into the chat now. And I'm just going to pull up and see if we've had any that have been asked already. Alrighty. So is feedback provided to the students after each phase? So feedback and assessment is something that we want to embed into all phases of inquiry. Absolutely. We want to be assessing and providing feedback as part of our ongoing teaching. We certainly want to be using those early phases of inquiry as an opportunity to be pre-assessing student learning. I read an interesting fact just the other day, a couple of days ago, that said 40 to 50% of what teachers are teaching, students already know. And so if we're not using opportunities for assessment and for feedback to students, then we're not really creating that rigorous learning environment that is extending students' thinking and supporting them in building rigorous new understandings. During Investigate, can we have students interview experts? Absolutely we can. That's a wonderful way to support students in building understanding and really seeing experts in the community, utilizing the people who are experts in the community. I love having students of all ages interview experts, but I also love having them involved in that process. So even right from kindergarten, if they wanted to interview an expert, I would have them make the phone call to arrange for somebody to either visit the classroom or for them to go and visit the expert. Even if that was having a police officer visit, I'd have the students call the police station. Now, usually if I was going to do something like that, I would have called ahead and pre-arranged a time that we would call to make sure that they were going to get a positive response from that and done some of the logistics. But I want them involved in building the confidence to actually make those phone calls, to write letters to their parents when they're planning trips. I get students involved in writing the permission slips. Sometimes we'll have to staple an official form to the back of it, but having students mark it on the classroom calendar, having students book the buses, all of that, getting really involved in those skills. What kinds of case studies should students be engaged in? So a case study could look like, if we were studying a unit on ecosystems, a case study could look like the exploration of a specific ecosystem. Now, ideally, we want to explore some ecosystems that we have in our local community so that we can go there on field trips, but we might have a whole class exploration of a local case study like that, a local ecosystem as our case study, and then individual students might explore different case studies. So one might explore the Amazon rainforest, one might explore the local rocky shore, another might explore a forest or a pond ecosystem. So that would be for a unit on ecosystems. But if we're looking at case studies being in a literacy unit, the case studies would be different books or different texts, or even different excerpts from a text would become our case studies. In mathematics, the worked examples that we're using or the problems that we're solving each become their own case study. So if we were looking at building an understanding of fractions and, what might be an example? The infinite nature of equivalent fractions, then each of the case studies that we use in terms of what are the equivalent fractions for a half, what are the equivalent fractions for 3/4, become the case studies that we're talking about in mathematics. Could reflection and action on past performance be part of transfer? Could reflection and action on past memory? Yeah, absolutely. So as part of transferring, we could be pausing and reflecting on that past performance and supporting students in, especially if we've got a skill-based understanding or a process-based understanding, to be building an understanding of what authors do, of what writers do, of what musicians do, then reflecting on their past performance and how that has changed would be a really powerful part of that transfer phase. Absolutely. All right, so just so you're aware, Paul is pulling some of these questions out of the chat and popping them into a list for me, so you can keep them coming. We've got a couple more minutes. You mentioned silent discussion and graphic organizers as ways of recording students' thinking. What are some other useful tools or personal favorites that might be useful to get started with a concept-based inquiry? So in our book, Concept-Based Inquiry in Action, we've got over 80 strategies. Just looking around, I don't have a copy for it. It's the green book. I had it up on the first slide. Another one, so we used the is not strategy today. Another one that I like to use is being able to explore push and pull factors that help us to understand human motivation. So that's another useful graphic organizer that we use. I'm just trying to think of some. We use a lot continuums in building an understanding of individual concepts. Another one is a concept graph that we use where we're comparing concepts with concepts and then using case studies on that graph. The book Concept-Based Inquiry in Action is filled with photographs and examples of all of these strategies being used in the classroom and more than 20 videos of classroom practice. So do you offer shorter, more intense PD courses? The Concept-Based Inquiry in Action is an 8-week course. We do offer some 6-week courses as well, and we are just starting to do some face-to-face workshops again this year. We don't have any open workshops at the moment. I've been doing a few in-school workshops, but we'll be starting to arrange some 2-day workshops. But in terms of online learning, we did used to have it as a shorter workshop, but we found in order to support teachers in writing a unit, teachers needed that time to be able to process that. And then in terms of other shorter things, we offer these 1-hour masterclasses. Would you suggest to use formative assessment for each line of inquiry? What about summative assessment at the end of the unit? So when I'm thinking about formative assessment, I'm thinking about that not in terms of the lines of inquiry, but in terms of the 5 to 9 generalizations. Every time students form a generalization or articulate a conceptual understanding for themselves, that is an opportunity for assessment. So students are telling you what they understand and then giving you examples through that transfer phase, giving you examples of that to back up and consolidate their thinking, which provides really rich ongoing opportunities for assessment. In terms of a summative assessment, if you want to have a summative assessment task at the end of the unit, usually we'd be assessing 1 or 2 of those understandings. You can use a performance-based assessment at that point, but we always want to link back to the generalize phase and make sure that students are either generalizing as part of their summative assessment or transferring their understanding of a generalization as part of that transfer phase. And so we love to use a reflection on process where students will actually take the generalization and use it to assess their own work if we're talking about some of our process-based understandings. Reflection has to be done at the end of inquiry, or do we have to do it daily or weekly? So I wouldn't leave it to the end, because we do want to reflect on, goal setting as a part of reflecting on learning in the planning phase for learning. We're reflecting as we're monitoring and evaluating. I also wouldn't make it every single day, because that's going to become overdone and not meaningful. We want to pause at kind of logical points in our inquiry to support students with reflection. How can we integrate STEM into conceptual understandings? So we want to building a concept-based inquiry unit with 5 to 9 understandings really unlocks the potential for bringing in the science or the technology or the mathematics into the unit, because we don't have to say everything in one understanding. We can have mathematics understandings underlying and supporting a unit on another topic. And it gives us that opportunity to intentionally create rich opportunities for STEM or STEAM or whatever it is that you want to call it. Is concept-based inquiry for literacy? Absolutely. It works with every subject area. Every teacher should be able to articulate what they want their students to understand as a result of the units that we're teaching. So in literacy, we'd articulate 5 to 9 understandings around the literacy or the focus of the unit. And then we would use an inquiry approach to explore different case studies or different texts to understand what authors do, what readers do, and build out the concepts from process. So we could do another whole masterclass on where concepts fit in literacy, and that will come, but absolutely concept-based. And my good friend and colleague Tiffany Brown has a 6-week workshop on concept-based literacy. Maybe, Paul, you can pop the link to all of the courses. So if people are looking for a specific arts course or a specific literacy course, we do have those. We've got a science one coming soon. Do we have online resources specific for language acquisition? Not at this stage. No, we don't have specific for language acquisition, although we do make sure in our inquiry units that we are specifically planning for learner variability and thinking about how we'd support language acquisition. In my experience, the concept formation phase is even more important for language acquisition. So Paul's just dropped the link in there to view all courses. All right, so we are at time now for today. Thank you so much for joining me for this masterclass. For those of you who are on holiday, enjoy the rest of your break. And for those of you who are in their last weeks of term, enjoy those last weeks. I know they can be chaotic and crazy, but you've got that holiday to look forward to. And then some of you, like me, are mid-school year here in the Southern Hemisphere. So we won't have a masterclass in July, but we are releasing a very special video in July. We decided to do that because we knew that people would be on holiday and in different time zones, and it's a little hard to track. So we're releasing the first in a video series in July for you to watch. So look out for that one. We also have a brand new website coming in July that we have been working on for about 6 months behind the scenes. So watch out for that one at the end of July. So thanks everyone so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.